Thank you, Keith and Moyers. Thank you so much for bringing that to us today. If we could back up to verse 33, Noel, if that's possible. Wanted to start just a little earlier. I kind of changed my mind just a bit. We are in Luke chapter 5, and what we're learning about today is an encounter that Jesus had with some of his, some people that were opponents of his throughout his ministry, and that was the scribes and the Pharisees, the religious leaders of his day, people who, well, in the parable of the prodigal son, these people were the elder brother. These people were the ones who could look at their own life and say in their own heart, you know, I've done everything God wants me to do. We obey His laws. We sacrifice according to the laws of Moses. We just do everything that God wants us to do. Tim Keller said something that's just really struck my heart. He said, you know, some people, and he said maybe a lot of us, try to avoid Jesus by avoiding sin. In other words, what we say in our lives is, I don't need God because I live a good life. I don't do these sins. I don't, go out and drink and carouse and take drugs, and I'm good to my family. I'm good to the people in my life. So I don't need God. I'm doing just fine, thank you, the way I am. And you know, that's the way people avoid God. They either run from God because they just don't want to be confronted by their sins, or they say, I don't need God because I avoid sin. Either way, we're avoiding God, aren't we? We want the benefits of God in our life. We just don't want God in our life. Well, these people were in that very same situation. They wanted the benefits of God in their life, and they tried to keep all the rules and all the regulations so they wouldn't have to really deal with God on a very personal basis. And Jesus confronted them with this because they were always wondering, why don't you keep the rules like us? Why don't you do everything we do? And they said to him, the disciples of John, now let's compare with somebody else, okay? The disciples of John often fast and offer prayers. The disciples of the Pharisees also do the same, but yours eat and drink. Jesus said to them, you cannot make the attendants of the bridegroom fast while the bridegroom is with them, can you? But the days will come, and when the bridegroom is taken away from them, then they will fast in those days. And he was also telling them a parable. No one tears a piece of cloth from a new garment and puts it, no one tears a piece of cloth from a new garment and puts it on an old garment. Otherwise, he will both tear the new, and the piece from the new will not match the old. Just makes a mess. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the new wine will burst the skins, and it will be spilled out, and the skins will be ruined. The new wine must be put into fresh wineskins. And no one, after drinking old wine, wishes for new, for he says, the old is good enough. May the Lord today add His blessings to the reading of His Word, considering these scriptures that I've just read to you. It is my custom, usually on Thursdays, by the way, if you want something in the bulletin, we print the bulletins on Thursday mornings. So give us some information if you can before then. But usually on Thursday, sometimes I'll write my sermon title down, and next time I'll try to write my scripture a little more legibly so Helen can read it. And I walk in and I hand it to her. And she simply looks at it and she kind of reads it out loud over again, my sermon title. But this time she simply looked at my sermon title, looked up at me, and she said, no. And I said, no. She said, no, I don't like change. And I said, you know what? I don't either. I don't like change. People in the Ozarks are often accused of resisting change. Do you know that? That's kind of something that's been hung on to us. You people there in the Ozarks, you people in Ava, you just resist change on every side. Well, as I thought about what I said to her, I really don't think I communicated it correctly. I wasn't really expressing what's in my heart. I read in the Springfield News and Leader an article that I think expresses my heart very well. It said, we people in the Ozarks, it's not that we're against change. We just like things the way they are. We like the idea that we have relatively low taxes. We like the idea that we have limited government involvement in our lives. We like our life pace. People here say, we just don't go maybe at the same pace that people do on the East Coast or the West Coast or in Chicago or down in Dallas. They live at a different life pace than we do. We kind of take things a little easier here. And we like that. We like it that we can go down, some of the guys can go down to the sale barn and spend the day there if they want to, or they can go over to Walmart, and where we used to see guys on the square kind of standing there like my granddad, spitting and whittling and swapping knives and swapping lies and all of those things they did. Now they do that over at Walmart on those benches or just kind of standing out in one of the aisles. We like the idea that we can do that. We just kind of like things the way they are. As a matter of fact, back I think it was in the 80s, there was a sitcom that was on television. It was called Cheers. Remember that? Remember the theme song? We like to go where everybody knows your name. And we just like it that way. We like things the way they are. But I have to admit something. The Pharisees like things the way they are too. They wanted things to stay just the same. I think that was the attitude of the people who were listening to Jesus as he spoke these parables and taught, and as they observed the behavior of his disciples, and as they observed his own behavior. It wasn't uncommon for them, like little children, to ask, why? Why? Why does he receive sinners? Why does he eat with them? Why doesn't his disciples fast? Why doesn't he and his disciples wash their hands and observe the rules and observe all of our customs? It seems as if Jesus had absolutely no problem poking his holy finger right in the eyes of people who said, I'm not going to change even if God says do it. He had no problem at all doing that. For example, in Mark chapter 7, verses 1 through 4. The Pharisees and some of the scribes gathered around them, and when they had come from Jerusalem, and had seen that some of his disciples, that is, the disciples of Jesus, were eating their bread with impure hands, that is, unwashed. Then he goes on to explain a little bit here to his non-Jewish audience. He said, for the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they carefully wash their hands, thus observing the traditions of the elders. And when they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they cleanse themselves. And there are many other things which they have received in order to observe, such as washing cups and pitchers and copper pots. So they asked Jesus, why do your disciples not walk according to the traditions of the elders? Now, in case you may not know, this had very little to do with what we would think of as sanitation. It had very little to do with washing all the flu germs off of your hands. This had everything to do, in their mind, with spiritual purification. After all, you did not want to touch the stuff that went into your body with hands that may have touched something that a publican would have touched, or a tax collector would have touched, or a sheep herder would have touched, or a prostitute would have touched, or a Gentile would have touched. You had to rid yourself of anything that might contaminate you spiritually, and the way they believed they did that was by washing their hands carefully until the water dripped off of their elbows. And they wondered, okay, Jesus, why don't you all do that? You could just hear it in their voice. You guys, you just want to change everything. You have no respect for our customs. You have no respect for our rules. Therefore, you have no respect for us. And we don't like it. Why don't you go back to Galilee where you came from and leave us alone? We like things just the way they are. By the way, note for a moment that their traditions had nothing to do with honoring God. Note for just a moment now, these were traditions, and they had absolutely nothing to do with honoring God. They had everything to do with their own self-esteem. They had everything to do with the idea that they were high and holier than these people that might have touched them in the marketplace. And they had to rid themselves of anything that might have contaminated themselves with those people. But notice what our scripture lesson said today. Jesus gave them a parable. And by the way, remember now, a parable, the word itself literally means a measuring stick. That's what the word parable means. The word parable describes something you measure something else with. For example, we would say a yardstick today. And you can take a yardstick and you can lay it down, and you can take a bolt of cloth and you can lay it down by that yardstick, ladies, and you can say, okay, now I know for sure if I mark it here and mark it there, I've got 3 feet of cloth or a yard of cloth, or men, when we're building something and we want to make sure it's square and it's so many feet wide, we could take that old yardstick down and we could say, all right, the door is going to be 36 inches wide, and that's how we want it. And you know, if you use that yardstick, that is a reliable measurement. Jesus was also giving us reliable measurements. His parables become what we can measure our thoughts, our feelings, our beliefs by. So whatever it is that you think, or whatever it is that I think about life and about myself and about God and about other people, I need to take whatever that is and lay it alongside the teachings of Jesus. And let me tell you what. It's not that Jesus' teachings need to measure up to what I think. Exactly the opposite. I have to measure up to what He taught. And this is one of the things He taught. And it makes perfect sense. He said, no one tears a piece of cloth from a new garment and sews it on an old garment. And in Jesus' day and time, they knew exactly what He was talking about. They didn't have pre-shrunk cloth then. Their cloth had to be shrunk. Back in the day, when I was a boy and you bought a flannel shirt, you knew you had to get it a little larger than it was supposed to be, because none of the fabrics then were pre-shrunk, and they would shrink, and you had to kind of guess, now where's this going to land when it's through shrinking? So you wouldn't think about taking a piece of unshrunk cloth and sewing it on a piece of cloth that has already shrunk. Why? Because you know there's going to be a big rip and this thing is not going to work. It's simply going to do more damage. You'll have the hole here and it'll no longer match there, and you'll have a new hole here and it won't match there. In other words, trying to do this simply is disastrous. It makes a mess out of things. It doesn't solve your problem. It creates more problems. So Jesus said no one would think about taking a new piece of cloth and sewing it on an old piece of cloth. No one would do that. The piece from the new will not match the piece from the old. It's crazy, he thought. But isn't it also crazy how we try to avoid change? We want to keep the old garments of our old lives of rebellion against God. We want to wear them proudly, but sometimes we notice that those old garments get pretty ragged looking. We start looking at our lives and we start noticing, you know what? Everything the devil promised me about this life of rebellion against God is a lie, and it's starting to look pretty bad. I'm starting to have health problems. I'm starting to have emotional problems. I have relational problems all over. I feel guilt in my life. And the holes and the rips and the tears of my life are just horrible. This is how I'll fix it. I'll sow a little bit of Jesus here, and I'll sow a little bit of Jesus there. I'll start praying a little more. I'll start reading my Bible once in a while a little more. I'll start going to church. I'll start doing that. I've been thinking about that for a long time. And we just start sowing a little bit of Jesus here and a little bit of Jesus there and a little bit of Jesus somewhere on the back. And we try to patch the holes. But we want to keep the old garment. And you know what Jesus says about that strategy? It's a mess. It's a mess because the two are incompatible. They just don't fit. And everybody sees it. That's the weird part of it. Everybody sees it. You see, the disciples of Jesus were different from the people around them, and they noticed it because their life had been radically changed. It wasn't like they were trying to sow a little bit of God here or a little bit of God there in their life. It was like they'd taken off the old ragged garments of their former life and they had put on completely new garments. Matter of fact, Jesus said that's what's required. That's what it looks like when we really have God in our life. He compared it to a man going to a wedding feast and not putting on the wedding garments. And when the master of ceremonies come in, he looked around, and it was so obvious that this guy here was here, and he didn't have on the right garments. He didn't have on the festive garments of a wedding feast. And he said, "Sir, what are you doing here without the garments on?" Remember that parable? And the Bible said he was speechless, defenseless. I'd like to think that guy had on a garment that just had a patch here and a patch there and a patch somewhere else. But he didn't have on the garment. I'm also reminded that when that old prodigal son came back home, before he could even give that speech to his father ran from the porch. He ran up the road. He had been looking for him all along. And he fell on him and he kissed him and he hugged his neck. And then what did he say? "Call for the new robe and have a new robe put on my son and new shoes put on his feet." I hear the author of Revelation. He received a great revelation from God, and one of the pictures that he saw that has been such a delightful thing for me to think about. He looks out and he sees a group of people clothed in brand new white robes. But the weird thing is, they're white because they've been washed in the blood of the Lamb. Those two things are completely incompatible. We all know that blood is red. But these robes are white, and they're new robes. And then a voice says, "Who are those?" And, well, you know, I don't quite understand this. And the answer comes back, "These are those who have come through great tribulation and have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb." They were brand new robes. Brand new robes. And there they are, clothed to them. So Jesus told them, get used to some new things in your life if you're going to follow me. And don't try the stupid patchwork stuff. It just makes a mess out of everything in your life. But he wasn't content with just talking about clothes. He talked about something else that every Jew knew about, and that was wine. The first miracle of Jesus. Remember what it was? It was in Cana of Galilee. And there was a wedding feast there. And his very first miracle was turning water into wine at that marriage feast. Now, especially if you're a Baptist, you might wonder, why on earth would he choose that one? That gives us something to explain, doesn't it? Why would he choose that as his first miracle? Because we all know the first thing you do is something that people remember. First words, first steps, first pictures, all stuff you remember. Why would Jesus want us to remember this? And why would he want us to remember this in the context of wine from water? Well, first of all, I want you to know something. Wine was absolutely essential for a Jewish feast, especially a wedding feast. Without wine, said the rabbis, there is no joy. Now, that doesn't mean that drunkenness was ever celebrated. As a matter of fact, drunkenness, especially public drunkenness, was something that was horribly disgraceful to Jews. Horribly disgraceful. But for a wedding feast, wow. Literally, wine was the symbol of joy. It was for the Jews. Now, I understand the abuse of wine wasn't like it was today with alcoholic beverages, because you just couldn't go down to the corner store and buy wine in the days of Jesus. Families produced it, and it was under the control of families. And it was because this was something that they could drink, and it was something that their families could drink, but it was carefully monitored, and most of the time diluted. But for a wedding feast, it was a symbol of joy. Why did Jesus want us to think that his kingdom should be symbolized by joy? Because that's what it is. That's exactly what it is. And my question is this, dear friend: do you really have joy in your life? Do you really, truly have joy in your life? Is there anything, absolutely anything, that makes you really, truly happy? Now, I know there are some personalities that see the glass half full and others see the glass half empty. And that's just kind of the way our minds work. And then there's folks, as we would say in the Ozarks, wouldn't be happy if you hung them with a new rope. I mean, there's absolutely nothing you can do to make some folks happy. It just isn't in them. It's just not a part of their personality. But I want you to know something. When Jesus talked about his kingdom, he always associated it with joy. He did that because that's how he started the whole conversation. I'm not talking about the kind of joy that the world offers. I'm not talking about happiness that is dependent on circumstances. I'm talking about a joy that comes into our heart when we know we have pleased our God, and our God is pleased with our lives. That's something that's literally poured into our hearts. You see, Jesus wasn't content with just patching up our lives. Jesus wasn't content with just pouring new wine into old wineskins. He said, by the way, nobody does that. That's like pouring that joy into an old brittle heart. Just can't contain it. No, he said, new wine belongs in new wineskins, because to do otherwise simply wouldn't work. It would be a big waste. Because you know something? What Jesus pours into our life when we come into his kingdom is something of great value. Paul said it was like having this earthen vessel, like having a clay pot that was filled with a valuable treasure, but not a broken pot. Not a broken pot. So Jesus said, no man puts new wine in an old wineskin. Why? Because when the wine ages, it expands, it gets bigger, and the old wineskin simply cannot hold it. If the wineskin represents our hearts, folks, and I believe it does, I think this is the lesson. In Ezekiel chapter 36, verse 26, the old prophet said this, moreover, I will give you a new heart, and I will put a new spirit within you, and I will remove the heart of stone from your flesh, and I will give you a heart of flesh. You see, it's not just that Jesus wants to pour joy into our life. He wants to give us a new receptacle. He wants to give us a new heart to receive that joy. In Psalms chapter 51, verse 10, the psalmist prayed to God, create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me, because the psalmist really wanted to have God's joy poured in our heart that would receive that joy and retain that joy and allow that joy to expand and grow in our lives. So then when the Lord fills our hearts, we will understand more fully what Jeremiah saw when Jeremiah chapter 24 verse 7 said this, I will give them a heart to know that I am the Lord, and they shall be my people, and I will be their God, for they shall return to me with their whole heart. New life change. And we can say, oh, yes, that's something important and something needed in our lives. So if we have no joy, or very little joy, or if our hearts have become cold and hard, and this world can do it to us, we can't just patch up all of those holes with a little religion. We can't patch up all of those things simply with a little bit of Jesus in our life here or there. What we really need to ask for, and what Jesus is more than willing to give us, is a brand new heart. A brand new heart to receive what He wants to put into our lives. A heart that desires to please God, not just ourselves like these Pharisees, not just to make ourselves more powerful or to feel better about who we are, but rather to honor God with everything in our life. That was the different heart. And boy, they couldn't understand it, these Pharisees, when they saw it. But the disciples of Jesus, on the day of Pentecost, whenever the church was born, stuff started flowing into people's hearts and lives they'd never had before, and there was celebration and joy. And dear friends, let me tell you what. A life filled with celebration and joy is a life that is attractive to people. You want evangelism to work in your life. Show people a life of celebration and joy. Show people a life where you worship God from your heart, not out of obligation, not because, well, I guess I got to go to church today and sing one of those stupid songs and, I don't know, go to Sunday school or something. And boy, I sure hope it's not too cold down there. I sure hope it's not too hot down there. And I sure hope the seats aren't too hard. And I sure hope the preacher don't preach too long. No, none of those things. But simply come to God and simply say, God, I love you today. I love you because you're high and holy and wonderful. And I love you because you can change even someone like me. That can bring such joy to us. Such joy. Do you want that kind of joy in your life? Doesn't mean you won't have any hardships or trouble. I guarantee you we will. But knowing that we have pleased God, that brings joy. Paul summed it up this way, that joy. I'm now ready to be offered, he said, and the time of my departure is at hand. I have fought a good fight. I've finished my course. I have kept the faith. He would have agreed with the writer of Ecclesiastes that said the day of our death sometimes is better than the day of birth, because he knew he had finished the race well. That's something else we can have in our life. As we ask for a song and give an invitation this morning, Jesus Christ can change your heart. Jesus Christ can give you some new clothes to wear. Jesus Christ can adorn us with Himself and with His presence. Boy, let me tell you what, when He does that, great things start to happen in our lives. great things.